Major developments today as we near the end of the blockbuster trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution rested its case after its 34th witness wrapped his testimony today. The summary witness was a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. Did he bring it home for prosecutors in their final attempt to prove the sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution charges against the music mogul? And the defense wrapped its case after a very brief presentation this afternoon without calling any witnesses, even the defendant himself. I'm criminal trial attorney Sara Azari, and this is Serving Justice. Joining me now are Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host, Safia Samee Ali, also an attorney, NewsNation reporter who's been following this trial very closely, and of course, our favorite NewsNation field producer, Tommy Christaldi, who's been inside the courtroom throughout the trial. Everybody, welcome. We're in the last stretch of this trial and all the salaciousness around it. I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you guys. Jesse, I want to start with you. The prosecution wrapped its case today with a summary witness who went over texts and voicemails and invoices, a lot of stuff. I mean, there's been other summary witnesses in this case as well. It seemed like he's the witness who sets this chronology and essentially connects the dots for the prosecution. How successful was this guy in helping the prosecution prove its case, and as to which charge?
I think he was supremely successful in helping prove the transportation to engage in prostitution charges.
Okay.
You're trying to say that Sean Combs transported sex workers and these alleged victims for the purposes of sex work. Remember, for those charges, you don't need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. It's more of a straightforward charge. You got the travel receipts, you got the cash payments, you got the messages. I mean, a lot of the messages were Sean Combs' a central focus of coordinating all of this. There was even a message where he was speaking with Cowboys and Angels, that escort service. So it was supremely difficult for the defense to try to isolate him or say he didn't know what was going on. He didn't really know who was being paid for what or who was being transported. And I think even where the defense was trying to say under cross-examination, he was paying for certain things from his personal account and not necessarily the business account. Sure, right? That might help with a racketeering charge. That might help disprove racketeering. He wasn't getting all of his staff involved. He wasn't using his business resources. But at the end of the day, if he's paying for it or organizing it or coordinating it, that's where I think it becomes really, really difficult for the defense to argue away against this. I think a lot of it, these.
Well, you mean for the prostitution, right?
For the prostitution, which, by the way, let's not forget, that's up to 10 years in prison. It's a federal charge. He's facing 2 of them. So
but he's never going to get 10 years.
You don't think so?
No, I think, look, I don't know how this judge is looking at this case. I know initially, early on, he made a comment off the record, not in front of the jury, that he felt like this case was based on gossip or something, or rumor. And I don't know how he feels. If he feels like the government really overreached and wasted tax dollars, he's ultimately the sentencer here. And but I don't think under any circumstance he's getting the max. But I think that's where his fairness will kick in. How serious does he think this conduct was, and how much has the prosecution abused their power in prosecuting Diddy? But I think also you have to understand that there's mitigating factors here, that the idea that he was using drugs, abusing drugs. And there's been a lot of testimony about, was he under the influence when he did this? Was he under the influence when he did that? I think that's not only going to be argued in closing argument to show that the Sean Diddy that you would be convicting is not this guy, is not the real guy. It's the guy that was under the influence of drugs, right? But it's also going to matter at sentencing for mitigating factors. I definitely, let me just say this. I am reading the tea leaves already, okay?
Shocker.
Right? Okay. So I believe this is going to be a hung jury on sex trafficking, a guilty on prostitution, and a not guilty on racketeering. That's my personal belief today. Could change tomorrow. Okay. And so I just think if he's going to go down on prostitution, there's no way he's going to get more than like 3 or 4 years max. Anyway, Safia, the defense presented its case without calling any witnesses. I mean, we know that the burden's entirely on them, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, all of that. And the jury gets the instructions for that as well. But looking back at these 7 weeks of testimony, how do you think this played out before the jury, that the defense essentially did nothing, pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, they don't have to. The defense doesn't have any obligation to call anybody. But as a juror, this could go a couple of different ways depending on the juror. I mean, it could go where they feel that the defense did their job with cross-examination and evidence, and they buttoned it up, and they're like, mic drop, we're done. We don't need anything more. And that it kind of shows that the prosecution didn't meet its burden, so they don't feel like they need to put anything back, and it's kind of a slam dunk for the defense. But there's going to be jurors who are going to wonder and be curious why the defense didn't call anybody. Was there nobody they could have called? Was there not a former employee? Was there no one that could have spoken up for this person? And that might raise doubt in their mind, and they could be thinking the defense could have done more. Why didn't they do more? And that could kind of turn the wheels in a different way. So that's why it's really important that the judge makes it clear to these jurors that the burden is not on them, it's on the prosecution. And that
but to your point, look, the idea that the evidence presented is one thing and evidence not presented also matters. What's missing is also evidence, right? And so these jurors are going to go back and deliberate, and they're going to be like, where are the other two victims? What happened to these two?
That's true.
They're in the indictment. And where's that Christina Coram that we've been hearing about, all the text messages, all the testimony about her? I think these jurors are going to have a lot of questions. And I think it's clear. And as I'm thinking back on this trial, I realize this prosecution has taken a lot of turns. I think they planned to have a certain case that they were going to put on, and this turned out to be a little bit different than their plan. And the jury's going to notice that. The jury's going to notice everything that's missing. The one thing that I thought was surprising, I thought they would at least put on their own expert, their own psychological expert. But again, I don't know what the value of that is when you're dealing with, it's clear. They're saying consent, prosecution saying coercion. And that abuse victim, who's a blind victim, what we call blind victim, because they haven't examined the parties, they're just essentially testifying to theory. I'm not sure how much more they could add for the defense, right, Jesse?
I don't think they have to. Look,
yeah.
They have done a phenomenal job.
I agree.
A phenomenal job cross-examining the key witnesses, whether it's Cassie, Jane, Mia, Brianna Bungolan. Look, with Jane, you ask percentages, I think there's a 15 to 20% chance they convict them of sex trafficking with Jane, not even because they even had to cross-examine her so much. Just look at the mountain of text messages. Yeah. And look, that, to be very clear, you can have a victim who says yes 9 times out of 10. If she says
no one time,
that's it. There are messages that she said she was reluctant because she wasn't feeling well. She was exhausted. Right. She felt she was being used. The jury could say she was being forced into this. However, there was a mountain of evidence, a mountain of messages where she's setting up these events. She's encouraging them. She's expressing her love. It's not the standard sex trafficking victim, as I think a lot of people believe. So the question becomes, why didn't they put on a case? Why didn't they call an expert? They don't need to call an expert. Testimony.
Yeah, and they did do a phenomenal job. There is a lot of doubt, almost as to every witness, the assistants, the accusers, Mia, Jane. It's just a question of how much weight is given to that. How much of that benefit does Diddy get, given that he's such an unlikable person who did commit crimes? It's just not the crimes before the jury now, right? And so it all goes into we'd like to put him away for something. And that, to me, if I was on the defense team, I'd be like, I wouldn't be mad at that prostitution charge, right? Because at least the jury has something to get my client on, out of these 3 charges. So I'm not really mad at that charge. And to your point, Jesse, I think it's really important. I think we talked about this before, to remember that he's just as screwed if he's found guilty as to one accuser and not as to the others. They don't have to find him. They can say, Jane, forget it. She's a money grabber. Money grab seems to be the star witness for the defense in this trial. And they could say, but Cassie was a victim of sex trafficking, and he's just as screwed. Right?
100%. It's minimum 15 years in prison.
Yeah. And Tommy, when the judge, this was really, I was like, what? Okay. The judge asked Combs about his attorney's decision, or whether it was really his decision, the attorneys communicated, not to have him take the stand. And he said, yes, it was my decision. But then he goes further and says, "You're doing an excellent job." I
Yeah.
mean, you're overstepping much.
Well, he said, by the way, Judge, I've been waiting for the opportunity to tell you this. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. I was surprised by that. Certainly. I, again, haven't done too many of these, so I don't know how standard that was, but the sense I got was that it was not standard at all.
No.
It was a bit strange that he said that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are maybe a couple of explanations that I've come up with for as to why he did. One, just as we're sitting here talking, maybe he knows that there's an impending sentencing and he wants to remind the judge he's a big fan. Maybe it's because, this is his way of reminding us he is in control of his legal team all throughout the trial. We've seen him passing the notes. We've seen him kind of running the show, it's felt like. And so even this was just another way to have his own voice be heard. But I was definitely
him using his charm for sure.
Well, sure.
He said this. He said this not in front of the jury.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
But look, I think if
it's almost like it was a performance for him. Like, oh, you're doing a great job. Like he's the critic here, where he's like, oh,
he's
you know
arbiter.
what? I think you've been doing an excellent job, as if the judge
making the band.
Yeah, like duh. No, I think duh. No, I think if he said something like, Your Honor, I just wanted to thank you for, what, but then also said, I apologize for my behavior early on and nodding or something like that. I think it would be more genuine. This to me sounded like it's Diddy using his charm or trying to use his charm.
Yeah, I thought there was an interesting moment where later on in that conversation, the judge asked him, this is solely your decision. And he said, absolutely. And then he kind of paused and said, well, I mean, I talked it over with my team, of course. We talked about it. And then the judge had to have him clarify, but you're choosing this. And he said, yes, of course. I just thought it was a lot more words out of his mouth than I was expecting, frankly. Yeah. I thought he'd be mostly quiet. I mean, we've seen him talk a handful of times throughout the trial, and it's typically just nodding and yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. So this was unexpected for sure.
No, it's definitely unusual. And the only time really you hear a defendant say anything, if that, is a remorse statement at sentencing, if he's convicted and sentenced. But during the trial and during the course of these sort of out of the jury conversations on the record, anyway, Jesse.
Well, do you think, by the way, real quick, do you think there's a pattern here? I mean, when was the last time that he did something like this, when he was allegedly nodding at the jurors after a very effective cross-examination of a key witness? I think he might be feeling really good going into closing arguments, and he has a sense of confidence and is, just speaking his mind to the court. I think,
Jesse, to your point, the defense he should be really happy. The money, all the money that he spent on this, absolutely dream team, money well spent. They're really great. They're all great at what they do. And they did a phenomenal job. I mean, their job was to cast out. They were so strategic in the way that they selected each lawyer for specific witnesses. I thought that was so brilliant, the way that they farmed out the work, the trial to different people on the team. But do you think, Jesse, that the defense should have presented more of a case? No, right?
Would it have hurt them to call, I think, the head of HR that they wanted to call?
Yeah.
Probably to strike at the idea of forced labor, maybe. But remember what their arguments were today when they were in that Rule 29 motion. They basically said, even if you take everything as true, these were willing, able U.S. citizens who could leave, and they did leave. And they may feel there is more harm in their witnesses providing testimony and being cross-examined by a very effective prosecution team than the benefit. And they probably feel at this point that there is enough that was raised and reasonable in their cross-examination and in all of the text messages. They don't have to do more. I think they were prepared to see where the case went. I think they had witnesses they wanted to call, including an expert. But at the end of the day, they might say to the jury, use your common sense.
Yes, yes.
I don't know which way they'll go, but that's probably what they'll say.
Yeah, and trial is a fluid process. Prosecution came with a plan, didn't quite work out the way they planned it. They changed course. Defense came with a 2-week estimate on their case, ended up being 2 days and then no witnesses. So it's a fluid process, and less is more. Less is more. It allows attorneys to argue to a jury without boxing themselves in. And I am waiting for the defense argument where it comes up. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where is Christina Coram? Where is Gina? Where is, I don't know who the other girl was, but she's gone. They're missing, you know? Anyway, I think that the idea that, to me, the defense is, of course, consent. Money grab is the star witness, and drugs, you know, his addiction is also there. Can't really think of anything else, you know.
Well, they'll basically say there was no criminal enterprise. That
yes, of course.
There was messages that came out today under cross-examination where he was actively trying to make sure his staff, including Christina Coram, didn't know what he was up to. It doesn't really work for a common enterprise and a criminal enterprise and a common purpose. So I think they have avenues there.
Yes, and you know, I think they're going to underscore everything that the prosecution is missing, just to argue that this is overreaching. This was a lifestyle. It was consented to. And to the extent that he was, you know, he behaved really terribly on many instances, he's messed up, you know, he's a whack job on drugs. But that's not who's sitting here, you know. I mean, I think there's going to be argument about that too. But anyway, well, I'm going to miss all of you when this is over. We're going to have to find another case to break down.
Isn't it called Koberger?
Yes.
Koberger in August, yes. But what are we going to do in July?
Take a vacation. We've earned it.
You don't want to talk Blake Lively, Justin Maldonado?
Oh, my God. That one's just like, yeah, that I guess because that has the salacious stuff, but it doesn't have the crimes. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like Amber Heardy, Johnny Deppy, kind of, I don't know. I'm not really getting into that much. Are you?
It's still super interesting. It's not any less interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we can get NewsNation to expand our segment to salacious pop culture celebrity mag rag stuff.
I mean, if you thought people were taking sides on this case,
yeah,
where do you see what the people are taking sides with Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively?
That's true. That's true. I think he just was so despicable on so many levels that, you know, it's kind of like a lot to take sides. But although today I saw some free Diddy hashtags on my feed. So I don't know. Maybe it's starting.
It's been contentious, I think, the entire time, especially within the overflow room where a majority of the public spectators are. People have had strong opinions this entire time. We were in the elevator after court today, and I was in the main courtroom today. So elevator down out of the main room, I heard someone saying, prosecution didn't prove their case at all. The defense didn't need to call anybody. The prosecution.
You know, I see people outside of the courthouse too with T-shirts and banners. And then when I was doing the segment from outside the courthouse, you know, people would be clapping if I said something that was like defense oriented.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, it's like they're teaming up. But anyway,
you know, when I covered R. Kelly in Chicago, there were prayer groups. There were people who showed up in white T-shirts.
Yeah.
That went to the court, and then right outside within the building would get into prayer circles praying for R. Kelly because they thought that this was like the devil coming to get, you know, an innocent soul. So, I mean, some of the stuff, people are very passionate and they feel very strongly one way or the other.
Yeah. Very interesting. Jesse, Tommy, Safia, thanks for joining me tonight. And to our viewers, thank you so much for following along. We're in the last stretch, but we're not giving up. We're going to be here tomorrow talking about instructions. We're going to follow through with all the closing arguments, and we will definitely be back to hash out the verdict once that comes in. So stay with us and stay with NewsNation. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you.